Welcome back to another episode of the Rankable podcast. I'm your host, Garrett Sussman of iPullRank, and we are back for another season. It's 2024. The year of AI is in the books, and yet we're probably just getting started. But today I am hyped, someone who's been playing around with it, but his other side of his job, his other focus is really in the authentic humanity of marketing and business, talking to customers. I am joined today by Joel Klettke. Joel is the founder and president of Case Study Buddy. Now, that's a specialized team. They work with B2B brands like HubSpot, Loom, Extensive, scaling their customer stories and drive more ROI from each one. He's, a sought after conversion copywriter. He happens to be, as you can see if you're watching the video, a bald Canadian and a tired dad trying to figure it all out. Like at the time of this recording, actually has a 2-month-old along with his two other kids in the house. Thank you so much for joining me today, Joel. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm tired. Three kids and now two driveways to shovel because I got wrangled into taking care of my next door neighbors. And it's like, I know most people don't speak Celsius, but it's like minus 27 today. So it's good and cold. There's a lot of snow on the ground. I tried to have a social life yesterday, so I went to a Flames game. That was not a mistake, but I'm paying for it now. So I'm good. I'm tired, but I'm good.
I was gonna say like grass is greener in this case, like the snow is whiter. I mean, you probably are sick of it up in Canada, and yet here I'm outside of DC. They promised us some snow, and climate change and all that jazz. Everything's more temperate. We just got some freezing rain, and my little one is like, "Dad, where's the snow?" And I'm like, "I'm so sorry, it's not coming."
Yeah. Yeah, we had like such a temperate lead up to this. We got kind of used to it, and now it's come back with a vengeance. So thankfully we're Canadian. We've dealt with this before. It's no panic, but yeah, snow shovels getting good use.
Well, I'm excited to talk about this kind of intersect between case studies, customer stories, testimonials, and SEO because I think it's very overlooked in the SEO industry. I think for the most part, a lot of people consider customer stories as purely sales collateral, purely helping the business, and doesn't play a role in the buyer's journey. That people like will never actually find it. And I'm excited for you to kind of disprove that perspective. Kind of start us off. Can you talk a little bit about how can B2B companies effectively integrate SEO strategies like into that customer success story to like enhance their online visibility? Like what's the SEO role?
Yeah, I think start from the perspective of what are these stories really about? They're about the questions that someone was asking, the solutions that they found, the journey through that solution, and ultimately to a result they're looking for. And inherent in all of that are all kinds of queries, long tail and otherwise, that someone might search that this type of content can help inform. If you're speaking about a particular industry and someone's looking for someone who's earned results in that space, there may be long tail queries around that. If you're speaking to, like even for your own brand's SEO, protecting your positioning for things like queries around reviews or around case studies or around pricing or these types of things, you have the chance to maybe creatively address some of those queries by strategically embedding those in the stories you tell, right? There's many ways to tell a customer success story. Some of those can be sort of the long form narrative pieces, lots of meat there for a search engine to chew on. Other times, we have clients who publish both that type of story, sort of angling towards some queries or some intent, and then they'll go ahead and publish something from the same transcript that's more of a Q&A style blog post where the question is actually right in the piece. You're working to make sure that those are different enough to not kind of cannibalize each other. But I think the realization that these are not just fluff pieces, these are not just lists of bullet points and nice quotes, that done well, you can be really intentional about what you target in a story, what questions you address in a story. And then use that, get that story to rank and show up for some of these long tail queries. And now, instead of being immersed in a sales pitch when someone clicks through, they're immersed in something that feels very organic and natural, which is a conversation that a real client of yours is having. So the nature of these things, people don't realize it, but it lends itself really nicely to some of these SEO strategies that companies deploy.
And it's really interesting, like kind of being able to extract the most like interesting and useful information when you're doing the interviews. Like your team has kind of perfected that interview process. You're in essence journalists. How do you feel like about the jargon aspect of it? Like, do you try to avoid it, or do you, from like an SEO perspective, be like, okay, let's get that jargon into the conversation because it might actually help us?
I mean, so much of this question comes down to how does your audience identify, right? There is
Mm,
some jargon that's meaningless, and marketers are, terrible for this, where it has no meaning even to them. But then there are spaces like engineering, data analysts, developers, that kind of thing, where there's actually a lot of meaning and identity wrapped up in that jargon. They use that language because to not use that language would be a slight against their credentials, their expertise. You wouldn't belong in the space if you didn't communicate in that way. And so, when you're thinking about, do we include this? Do we not? I think what it comes down to is, do your buyers actually talk that way? Is that the way that they communicate? Is that something they'll look for? A classic, not classic, but an example of this is when we're writing a landing page for ourselves. We're trying to, make some inroads into AI solutions as potential clients. We love the space that's emerging. We see a ton of potential. We're also trying to make inroads into cybersecurity. We see a ton of potential there. When we're writing a landing page for cybersecurity, for example, we need to have some abbreviations like, you know, capture the attention of the CISO and those types of things, because when we can communicate that, their light bulb goes on. Oh, they get it. They talk like us. They know our space. They can serve us well. So jargon is actually really important. It has a really great role to play when you're speaking to or trying to communicate with an audience that holds it dear and uses it regularly. It's a way of kind of putting up the flag and saying, like, we get you, we get this space, we can serve it well. So, I think you want to cut it when it's meaningless, when it's your jargon and not your audience's jargon. But otherwise, as long as your reader, your buyer, your decision maker knows it, understands it, values it, it should stay.
Do you, when you're having conversations with clients, does SEO come up ever, or is their perspective really all about like the sales collateral aspect of it?
People put case studies in a box, and it's like a box that almost doesn't belong anywhere. It
Mm,
really varies, right? People, like, who's usually tasked with doing case studies? Well, it's the marketing team, product marketing, customer marketing.
mm.
Who uses case studies? The sales team, the marketing team as well. And so a lot of people, the traditional viewpoint on these assets is, well, it's end of journey. It's an end of journey asset. Someone's on the finish line, you hand it to them, nudges them over the line. That's a really limited way of thinking about it, because whether it's a written story or a video testimonial, for example, like, we haven't even talked about doing SEO for video. Like, talk about low hanging fruit. If you can get your video testimonials ranking, or if you can adapt that content to a how to type of video, I mean, the world's your oyster at this point. There's still so much untapped potential there. So I think, a lot of people put case studies and customer stories, video testimonials in this tiny little box where it's like, well, this is something we do once in a while. No one really owns it. We're just going to kind of host it on the site. That's where it will live, or we'll give it to the sales team. We'll do whatever sales teams do with it. When the reality is, like, these, I've worked in marketing long enough to know I've done SEO. That was my job for almost 5 years, agency side. I've done copywriting. I've done ads. I've done email. I've done outreach. I've now, producing these things. And the reality is, done well, these stories fit across the entire kind of spectrum of your sales and marketing activity, from demand gen and advertisements. Like, we have clients who very successfully run ads and remarketing ads to their stories instead of landing pages, and it converts well for them. Your cold outreach, bringing stories and proof into that, makes a big difference. Mining these interviews for positioning and your own copywriting, your own messaging, there's benefits there that trickle into everything else. Nurturing and getting people on board, retention, even upselling and cross-selling, right? If you have a client who's made a decision to go to a more premium tier, capture that story, tell it to people considering moving to that premium tier, and you're throwing, gasoline on the fire. So if nothing else, I think one of the things we really try to work on is when someone comes in, they have this preconceived idea of where this thing fits and what it's meant to do and how it should look. We're trying to expand that mindset and get people to see, like, no, it's not write a 1,500 word piece, post it to your blog and move on with your life. It's create this whole kind of buffet of different pieces of content that will work for you across the entire sales and marketing spectrum. So there's a lot of education, I think, even now, that we're still doing, to even with seasoned marketers, because for so long this has been, second rate, or second consideration, or just not really thought about.
No, I mean, it speaks, and obviously, I'm coming at it saying like sales collateral, and yet obviously, it's not just a checkbox. There's a whole, to your point, there's a whole strategic approach to it. Can you speak a little to the video and the YouTube value? Like you were saying, like there are different ways that you can surface that. How do you approach it?
Yeah, again, I mean, for the SEOs listening, like, it comes down to, number one, you want to look at what kinds of queries around questions your customers are asking, comparisons, X versus Y, like what types of queries are already triggering video results, and then how could we take a customer story and optimize it to fit there? Can we do that natively with just a testimonial and optimizing that way? Should we be putting together a reel that has lots of different perspectives? Are we taking those stories and embedding them again in more of a how-to, something prescriptive, something more like a playbook? Um, but there's so much value because that visual real estate in search results is still substantial. I mean, yeah, the top is clogged up with ads and so on and so forth. But when you have, and map packs and all those things, they draw the eye. And so being able to surface a video in a landscape where otherwise all just, well, blue link, blue link, blue link, or ad, you can gain an outsized amount of attention, and you can, communicate in a way that's immediately compelling. I can watch, I can listen, I can engage, versus I can click through, I can read, I can navigate, and so on. It kind of changes the dynamic. So it doesn't have to be one or the other, but having that be part of your intentional strategy. How are we labeling this? How are we promoting this? How are we structuring this to try to answer the question that someone might ask and trigger the video? I think it's a smart strategy that not nearly enough people are using.
It's interesting to me because now I'm thinking about like some of the conversations that you're having with clients on kickoffs, and I can imagine there's a lot of business information gathering, obviously, that you have to do. How often are SEOs involved in the conversation, or does it typically get passed to them after the fact?
Virtually never. Almost, I can't recall the last time we ever had an SEO on the call. Like, SEO is, for these stories, it is a remote consideration if it's thought of at all. And really, again, because people don't connect the dots, they put case studies in this bucket, this checkbox was like, get the customer story, okay. And it's almost like just having these and having them live is the victory unto themselves. They don't think about distribution, they don't think about how someone actually going to find this, they don't think about, what's the strategy for the storytelling, they don't think about conversion, and how can we actually get people to take action. Like, something that drives me bonkers is, you can go to billion-dollar brands websites, they have case studies with no calls to action. There's no way to act on this very compelling, stealthy sales pitch you just gave me. I can't do anything immediately other than, like, I'll go up to contact or whatever. Like, what a whiff. You had the opportunity to make a very specific invitation to value, and you just didn't do anything about it. So, SEOs really aren't, it's not top of mind. It's, for most people, they're not really part of the conversation. And I think there's a reticence too, right? Like, you also, I think, done well, the SEO part almost, it can inform at the beginning and then it's built after. Like, it should be, in my mind, part of the strategy, but not the strategy. I don't think you should do case studies for SEO. I think you should bring an SEO perspective to your case studies, if that makes sense. Like, you don't want, like, SEO should not be the primary reason you're publishing these things, but that doesn't mean it's not a very compelling secondary or tertiary, way of deriving value from them. That, again, it's just not on the radar for people. Like, I do think SEO should have a voice in, hey, where is their search volume based on what we're seeing in sales, the questions we're being asked. Like, how could we marry this up so that, okay, for every one person on a sales call asking this, the 500 people just Googling it, can find something too.
And to that point, like if it's not SEO, it almost makes it like we're stepping outside the SEO box. I'm curious, outside of a generalist marketer, who within a marketing department should own the case study? Is it a life cycle thing? Is it a generation thing? Is it sales? Like, what's been your experience?
So it's a rowboat, is the best way of putting it.
I love
Marketing
it.
sits at the front, and they should be the ones kind of helping everyone move in unison, because in isolation, everything, well, if everyone's rowing their own direction, you're going to go circles, right? The trouble is when marketing is just tasked with doing this and no one else is involved, well, sales doesn't get what they need. Like, sales does not love, I can say definitively, 1,500 word deep dive pieces that marketers are enthralled with. They don't necessarily love 3 minute long videos or 5 minute long videos. For their scenario, they need something high level, succinct, something really focused, something they can speak through. When marketing doesn't ever talk to sales about that, they don't produce that. So sales is forced to use assets that aren't really made for them, but could have been. So I think the ideal is kind of that rowboat mentality where it's like, okay, you do need someone to drive and oversee and project manage, and that can be marketing. Within marketing, it depends on the size of the company, right? If there's a product marketing function, it's usually them. If there's a customer marketing function, then they'll usurp, product marketing, but that's newer. Like, the average customer marketer has only been in their job for 2 years. It's a very fresh and new field. And then beyond that, part of the marketer's job is to engage with leadership. Where are we going? What are our priorities? Where are things headed? Engage with sales. What objections are we seeing? Who are we being compared to? Where might the opportunities lie? Engage with, customer success managers and these other teams to kind of unify on what are the stories we're telling, what are the formats we're telling them in, where do they live, how do they get distributed, and most importantly, like, what is everyone's role in that? Because the other side of it is marketing often doesn't have the same connection to the customer. It might be a rep, it might be a salesperson. So if marketing again is left in isolation to like reach out, try to make contact, well, this person's maybe never heard of you before. Their win rates are going to be low. Um, so yeah, it's a team effort. It's driven by the marketing team, most often product or customer. Um, but everyone has to row in the same direction or nothing's gonna happen.
I'd imagine that like more often than not, you craft these interview questions and you get this story from the customer, and it probably goes in a completely different direction than expectations. How often does like the actual output, the deliverables, the insights from working with a client and talking to their customers results in something completely different from the original plan and strategy?
I think it's honestly kind of both, because for us, our approach is we want to go in with as much context as we can get. We want to know from our client's perspective, what is the story here? Like, what's known? What metrics do we have? What do we know about how they came in? So we go in with, an underlying understanding and a goal of, this is the story we're looking for. These are the insights we're trying to service. Now, that being said, there is always room for surprise, because when you start to talk to customers in this way, like, yes, we will more often than not capture the crux of the story we went looking for, but it's not a no, but it's a yes, and we discover that. And then in addition to that, all kinds of insights that maybe the team was blind to. We, because we come in as a third party, have the ability to ask like verboten questions. We can say, hey, when you were evaluating, like, what was your decision criteria? Like, what was on your must have list? Who else did you consider? Why didn't you go with them? And it's not a threatening situation at this point. They've made their choice, so they're like, oh yeah, we need, this was a must have and this was critical and that sort of thing. And so the insights that can come out of that, the way your customers actually think and buy and talk about what you do and the value you bring, that is often surprising. And you will always, it's why we never do a story without the customer's involvement. Like, some companies, especially SEO agencies, for some reason, like, can't we just like take the metrics out of analytics and write it up ourselves? And they're like, no, number one, you have very high odds of burning a bridge or pissing someone off or publishing something that nobody wants to read in the first place or watch in the first place. But more importantly, like, it's a customer success story. It's not a you success story. You're taking the most important perspective out of the equation. You're robbing yourself of the opportunity to learn all this stuff. And you're robbing your leads of the opportunity to hear from someone other than you. Like, congratulations, you got 500% lift. Nobody cares. They care about the customer's experience of that and their validation of that, right? So we will never do a story without interviewing the customer. Um, which, people go, well, it's so much harder. Like, yeah, it is. It is. Because doing things right is tough. Like, do you want it to be easy or do you want it to work? And you know, that's, I think, a tougher pill to swallow. But also, that reticence comes from just not having a process, not having experience, blocking your own shots, thinking, well, they'll say no, or we're under NDA, so they'll never go for it. Like, they do. They often do. It just comes down to how you position, how you ask, how you conduct this thing.
It's fascinating, and your experience is, it feels like it's such a to and we've been discussing, it's such an underrated, important, valuable exercise, especially to do it with an expert and professional like you and your team, because you surface all sorts of additional insights that people don't understand. You got to get case studies and testimonials out of the box. Dude, this has been a really interesting conversation. I think you've already changed my perspective. On a lighter note, and I think this is a really fun question, but I got to ask, if you, Joel, could write a case study about any historical figure or event ever, who or what would it be and why?
I'm struggling for his name. It's like it's mostly would just be pure comedy, but there was a guy like way back in the 17 or 1800s who just pulled like the greatest scam of all time, like convinced like thousands of people to get on ships and go across the sea to a city that didn't exist. Um, and like not ethically necessary. I think it would be fascinating to look at like how he pulled that off and how he did that and like how do you mobilize action to that like scale. Like I learned about this from a book called Truth, a Total History of Bullshit. I think it was in there. Um and like yeah, so I think that would be really interesting, mostly comedic to put together because yeah, like the art of persuading people to get on a boat and abandon their lives to go to a place they're not even like sure is there, and like the stones it takes to do something like that, I think is just like a fascinating character study too.
It should, I mean, that's just history in general is so fascinating when people make these like really like life risking decisions based on no information. I mean, I don't think we're scared shitless these days, but it's like, I don't think anyone would, like, if they think the world was flat at the time, would just go and sail in that direction and hope for the best and see what happens. And that's what I mean. Then again, at some point they'll offer people going to Mars and we'll see how many people actually like sign up to for that space shuttle journey.
Yeah, I won't be one of them.
Yeah,
That's for sure.
me neither. Um, okay, that being said, we're bringing back the rapid fire rankings. Are you ready to answer some SEO questions?
I'm ready. Yeah.
Okay, let's do it. We're gonna turn on the music, put some time on the clock. Here we go. Joel Klettke, rapid fire rankings. Rank your best SEO marketing or marketing win.
Yeah, I think like generally having multi-billion dollar companies come to you instead of you having to approach them, purely because of how specialized you are in a space, like that's by far like I think the biggest win. Like to have social networks and multi-billion dollar cap companies and like platforms everybody buys stuff on show up in your inbox is yeah pretty special.
That's incredible. Rank your top 3 SEO tools.
My opinion here is like completely worthless because I don't really do much SEO anymore. So I gotta go like I gotta just kind of throw sort of what I know or hear about a lot. So like Ahrefs, Simrush, and like Screaming Frog, people seem to still really love. So let's say those things. If I was doing SEO, I'd like maybe.
I feel like I should
Yeah.
almost like twist it to like case study testimonies, but I will still ask, what is your rank your best SEO trick or tactic?
Yeah, I think some we talked about, right? Like at this time, there's just so much low-hanging fruit in repurposing video testimonials and optimizing those for search. Like it's something that if you have the footage to do, it doesn't take a ton of effort and it can yield some pretty decent results. So yeah.
Okay, we were talking about this. Rank, what's the biggest scam in SEO that you've recently seen?
So yeah, I don't know if it was like necessarily a scam, but that big controversy around that company who generated, like they analyzed their competitors' content, generated like a shitload, like thousands of articles of AI generated content, stole a bunch of the other company's traffic, and then it like ended poorly in spectacular fashion. Like I think what pissed people off there was more just the arrogance of like the way it was presented. But to me, what's fascinating is like we already do that stuff. We just don't use AI to do it. Like whether people want to own up to it or not, ripping off your competition, their links, their content, what's working for them. That's like a time tested like badge of honor to be an SEO. Everyone worth their salt has done it. So it was the anger causing thing the mechanism? Was it that AI was involved in this? Is AI better than overseas writers you're paying less than a penny per word? Like, is that ethically different? Or is it just faster and you don't like that? I think people liked seeing, the comeuppance there, but to me, I thought it was like a fascinating experiment. Like, unpopular, but kudos to those guys for trying it and now living with the outcome. But uh, I think if they hadn't been so cocky about the way they did it, it would have been a fascinating case study in using AI.
Absolutely. I mean, speaking of which, check out Joel wrote this excellent blog post all around the ways that different AI businesses can use case studies and customer success stories on their, blog, on their website, make it visual, make it findable. Great piece there. Did you have a favorite customer story that you found from your research on that piece?
No, I mean, there's lots of really great examples, and companies doing really interesting things. You like to see some of the scrappier kind of underdogs, like the things that Tome is doing, I think are really interesting. They're telling some more compelling stories. They're good examples of like disambiguating what the hell your thing can do for an audience, which really matters for that emerging space. So Tome, if I had to rank them, but um, they're all worth checking out.
And there's a lot. Definitely check out that piece. We'll have a link in the description notes. Can you rank what you either used to love most about SEO or still do?
I think it's the thing I hated most, which is just that it was always changing. Like it's frustrating to do really great work and then have that really great work just like vanish because someone else either did even better work or because what the goalpost shifted on what constitutes really great work. So yeah, I mean that it's dynamic and changing. There's always something to learn. I think I certainly like that more than like working a cash register. But it's frustrating too.
Gotcha. Rank, well, you're not really learning as much, but if you, from your experience, rank your best learning SEO resource.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly wouldn't know these days where to go. I think it's more just I try to stay on top of like what individuals are sharing, and see what comes out of, like I think conferences, people don't really go for the learning, but if you go to the right ones, smaller events, people who are actually like in the guts doing the work, not just evangelizing like their companies, I think that's probably where I find the most takeaways, especially when someone can present something practical. But like yeah, I'm on the outside looking in on SEO, so I still pine for the days of like inbound.org.
Yeah. Oh my God, that's a throwback. Speaking of which, though, you're still gonna try and find Joel if you're going to MozCon this summer, where he will be giving some practical, amazing, awesome advice, TBD on what that specific topic is. I'm not gonna blow up any spots in this episode. Finally, probably, or not finally, but one of the most unfair questions that I do ask, speaking of individuals, is rank the top, 1 to 3 SEOs or marketers that you most admire and look up to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot. Unfortunately, mine are all dudes. So, so I mean, I maybe could have thought through this list a little better, but Sam Woods is, doing some really interesting things. He's a copywriter, but more than that, he's a smart business head. He's doing some really interesting things with AI. You know, Andy Crestodina is someone I just really admire, mostly because of not even necessarily his knowledge, though it's vast, but he's just a connector. He's like very good at being intentional with people, making connections, being very selfless, and in return, I think he reaps a lot on the back of that. But just like he's proof that nice guys can finish first. John Henry Shirk, like again, he's like not explicitly just limited to SEO these days, but the way he thinks through a problem, the way he builds a team, the way he, attacks a challenge. I'm always learning, something from him, and the way that he comes at things. Like all of these people are both, smart in their craft, but then they're also really, good people and good business heads as well. Beyond that, like Joanna Weeb on the copywriting front, and Stefan Georgi, and people like that, certainly, outside of SEO, but I'd start there.
Yeah, it's not fair to limit it to a few people. So I apologize there. But we were, in the AI front, we've been doing a lot of generative AI sort of conversations over at iPullRank. So I thought a new question that I've added to the rapid fire rankings last year was ridiculous. So I got to ask you, what's your generative AI hot take?
Yeah, I think my hot take is that it can actually be creative and create creative content. Like, I think there's this notion out there that, like, well, it can only do what it's been trained to do, and it can't go outside of those limitations. And so because of that, it can only regurgitate. And I think while there's certainly aspects of that that are true, I will remember forever when my jaw dropped. I was playing around with Dolly through ChatGPT, trying to come up with, an image, and I don't know what mental path I was on, but I was like, well, I want an image of like a super muscly sheep just like holding a wolf by the neck. So prompted for that, and then it added on its own text that said, "Do you even lift?" Like EWE, like the sheep. And I was like, where did that come from? Like, I didn't prompt for a slogan. I didn't ask for it to be a motivational poster. But I was just shocked, by that combination of ideas, right? And we tend to think, creativity is just like in a vacuum. It's like this spark of like something brand new, when in reality creativity is just new iterations on old things. So when you have generative AI that has this collection of all the old things, especially with imagery, but even within text, I do think it can come up with novel creative ideas. I do think you can create creative content with it, and I think the people that don't want that to be true are the ones that have a vested stake in it not being true. The copywriting community, the marketing community, especially, like, so yeah, I mean, that's where I fall, is like there's still a human aspect going into the machine, and if you're creative, it's creative. If you're not creative, then yeah, you're gonna get garbage.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. I mean, you think about like, the typewriter's not the best example that people use sometimes, but I do think of like Adobe Photoshop. It's like it's just another tool that allows you like I can't use Adobe Photoshop the same way an actual like really talented graphic designer can, maybe with like years of practice, but these tools sure they'll get easier. The biggest thing, and this is where your advantage will come in, like future proofing yourself, is communication, right? Our ability to communicate the ideas that we want it to execute. And if you can't communicate, yeah, it's going to be shit.
Yeah.
Finally, rank your number one cause or charity that you want to promote.
I mean, there's lots of these. I think one that's top of mind, just with different things going on in my world, not personally, but with people that I know, is the Ronald McDonald House. So it's a place where people who are, have children in hospital can go and kind of be together as a family, especially if they're traveling for things like specialists or what have you. It just brings like a sense of togetherness and normalcy, and like, in a time when it's probably needed most. So that's one of a few that I think is doing something good, doing something valuable. And as a dad with three kids, you hope you never wind up in a situation where you never have to make use of it. But boy, am I glad that, it's there for those who do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great cause. I definitely company I was at a while back had we actually went and served food to like a lot of the folks who were there brought a lot of great food there, and it's just good people. Appreciate that, Joel. This has been awesome. If people want to get in touch, where's the best place to find you?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to see what case everybody is up to, or just learn and get some DIY kind of tips, our blog is chock full of them. There's not a whole lot of sales pitching going on in there. I mean, we're always an option, but there's a ton of just go do this. Here's an example. Here's what to think about. So if you're working on your own customer stories, you'll find a ton of stuff there. For me personally, LinkedIn is one of the best places. I don't always respond quickly, but I do always respond. So be patient, but I love to connect and chat and jam on there. And then I'm not as active these days, but I'm still on Twitter or X or whatever we're calling it now. Yeah, but LinkedIn is probably best, and then the case study buddy site is where you'll be able to learn a lot and apply a lot too.
And in addition to case study related content that he posts on these social networks, check out his little brand AI exercise that he's been doing with generative AI avatar versions of himself. I'm not even gonna say what it is. I'm not even gonna let you say what it is. People are just gonna have to go and find you and see these ridiculous images that you've been posting on the
Yeah,
feed. Thank
sounds
you so
good.
much for joining me. I really appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thank you.
My name is Garrett Sussman. It's been another episode of Rankable for iPullRank, and we will catch you next week. Peace out.